So I had to switch to KineMaster instead of iMovie since I finally got impatient with my sister. I'm not waiting to use iPad anymore. So yeah, thanks for bearing with me, guys. On to the video. There was a point in time that not many people still alive now remember where comic book characters and companies didn't exist. Of course, life with animation, comic books, and even comic strips were originally intended for adult audiences, but eventually started getting marketed towards children since that's an audience that appealed to even more greatly than adults. And as you may know, the generation from the late 60s to early 70s is a generation that grew up with the comic book versions of Spider-Man, Batman, Captain America, and so on. Or maybe they just grew up with the Japanese Spider-Man show. Who knows? Now, in this video, I'm not going to be biased against one or the other. I'll try to keep it from the perspective of the side of me who's basically in love with both Marvel and DC. It's been said before, if you truly love something, you'll be able to admit it isn't perfect and love it anyway despite those flaws. So I guess today I'll be pointing out the pros and cons of DC and Marvel and why both should be respected in my opinion. Their legacies in various media that they hold and why I love both so much. So on with the video. I think it's best to start with the forms of these characters they originally came in, that people aren't really familiar with in the first place, unless you're really, really into the medium. And I don't claim to be an expert on this. I just, I seem to know more than most people do about this stuff. Anyways, those being the comic books, of course. If I had to start somewhere, I'd say the first big difference would be the way the characters are written and portrayed. Spider-Man, for example, has a very similar origin to a DC character, that being Batman. It's been said that Marvel imitated some aspects of storytelling or characters from DC, some for parodies, like Deadpool and Deathstroke, some for out of admiration. And I feel like imitation is the highest form of admiration you can give. But anyways, DC did the same with like Plastic Man and Mr. Fantastic, for example. Even if they do imitate each other, it's pretty clear who's winning at the moment in the race to get a better cinematic universe, as well as I guess like animated universe and comic universe. Portraying their characters differently isn't necessarily a bad thing. It can be have its pros and cons, of course, but that's what makes them different from each other as well. It's been said that they imitate each other's storytelling styles, I guess, or writing. As I've already said before, they're different as well as similar. Um, as I was saying, Batman is a lot darker than Spider-Man is. They both have a no-kill rule, of course, for the most part, that they struggle to keep and sometimes even disregard when the time comes, depending on the writer, of course. Spider-Man has a rogues gallery, though that's a little bit more human, if that makes sense. I don't think a guy with mechanical arms fries to his back through a chemical explosion is more intimidating than a guy that can kill someone in cold blood with no hesitation, or has had an instance where he cut his face off and wore it as a mask, just to prove a point. That's how these companies are so different, too, in the way they portray their characters. DC goes for a more fictional route, or fantastical route, while, however stupid it may sound, Marvel has a more realistic approach, or grounded approach, I guess you could say. Its characters can simultaneously be Norse gods and be the most human characters in the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe, and have the best arc too. Sorry, um, or that Stan Lee ever touched. It's his ability to make the least sympathetic characters possible relatable in a very weird way that makes you question just why do I like this character so much. And even I guess DC has that sometimes. Um, but that's what makes the Marvel universe so far off from DC at times. It's got more characters like that, more human characters. Especially even if the villain is sort of relatable sometimes. One comparison you can see as an example of this is Thanos versus Darkseid. Darkseid is from the New Gods comics, and Thanos is from dang it, what's Secret Wars. So sorry for any stuttering crap. I'm going off the top of my head at this point, but um, Thanos he wants to kill half the universe to impress a woman. I mean, yeah, and then Darkseid just wants to do it for the heck of it, for fun, basically. So he's more of a quote unquote god than Thanos is, even though Thanos eventually obtains all of the Infinity Stones and gets his goal accomplished. Darkseid has an ultimate enemy staying in his way. It's like an immovable object versus unstoppable force. Superman is the protector of Earth. He is the immovable force for
Object.
the most part. He is the representation of good, and Darkseid is
Unstoppable force.
coming at him. Or it can be Doomsday, or in some cases Lex Luthor. Um, Thanos is more human than Darkseid will ever be, in my opinion, unless the Snyder cut humanized him or something like that. So just because Darkseid just wants to destroy the universe for the heck of it, there's no doubts about him being pure evil because he doesn't have a sympathetic backstory or anything to give him actual motivation to do that, and doesn't have any fluff to go along with his monologues. He just wants to conquer the universe, and that's that. I guess you could say he's a flat character because of that, but hear me out. This calls for interesting situations when it comes down to it. Even the heroes in DC are basically gods compared to heroes in Marvel because the way Marvel was written, they always have very obvious flaws, and it's more a slice of life esque type thing. It's like DC is the shonen anime of comic books, if you wanted to put it that way, and Marvel is the slice of life show. And it's like looking at Dragon Ball Z versus Watamote. It's very obvious they're very, very different, but they're both anime. So yeah, maybe that's not a fair comparison, but you get the point. Sorry, went on a tangent. Um, I can't relate to a millionaire orphan manchild that dresses up like a giant bat, but I can relate to a nerd that has like two friends and a love for science or pop culture, depending on the version. In the end, I love and appreciate both of these companies for the obvious reasons. They are what they are. I wouldn't trade that for the world. And I think I've gotten to a conclusion, so yeah, that's it. I'll see you around.
By the way, my Discord and Twitter are linked down below, so check them out. That is, if you haven't already, I guess.